is taking an axe to trading relationships, to security arrangements, to all kinds of things. And that affects, of course, their partners. And all the partners are very discombobulated to be true. I mean, he's deploying tariffs as a weapon, as an economic weapon to get more benefits for the United States over trading partners. And of course, what he's doing with Ukraine, I think, is probably the most frightening example of this new, not Pax Americana, Trump Americana. And that is, he changes his mind. He knifes you in the back. I mean, you take, and doesn't get the facts right.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by Diane Francis, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. She's editor-at-large with the National Post newspaper and has a best-selling Substack with regular updates on geopolitics and the United States. Diane, welcome.
Thank you for having me again, Lou. Here we go. More chaos.
In your recent Substack article, you say Pax Americana, that's American peace, has ended. What does Trump's new America look like for the rest of the world, do you think?
Well, the Pax Americana was a Latin phrase that was applied to the post-war period, the Second World War period, where the Americans were the only economy left standing, Canada too, and they indulged in a huge Marshall Plan, rebuilt Europe, created NATO, created UN, the United Nations, created the GATT, free trade, all these sorts of institutions that have kept the world fairly stable. But this now looks like he is not interested in many of the underlying tenets that kept Pax America involved. And I think the rest of the world knows that. They seem to be, it's not just about isolationism, it's a worldview about they're first, they want to look after themselves first, get richer and richer. And the world is dividing into spheres of influence and they want to have a big chunk without paying a lot.
And this is as much Elon Musk's worldview as it is Trump's to an extent, isn't it?
Well, he's not a geopolitical advisor, but obviously he's in there. He's on phone calls and so on. This is not particularly a wise person, and he's not very astute when it comes to what's going on around the world, but technically he's a genius.
And you talk about that kind of motto, move fast and break things, in your article. You've been in the Silicon Valley industry. Doesn't Washington need a bit of that Silicon Valley energy?
Well, they're getting it in spades, with Mr. Musk. Of course, long overdue. I would say that go into any corporation as well, and you're going to go, and if it's really carefully audited, and hasn't been for a while, you're going to find all kinds of race and nonsense and fraud and corruption and all kinds of things that go on in a big entity with a bureaucracy. So that applies to the private sector as well as the public. But, the federal government of the United States is gigantic. And so, he's going in there and he's having a good time. Now, it's probably long overdue. I'm not against it. And I find what's disappointing is that the liberal media, which is most of the legacy media in the U.S., which I watch now from afar, are moaning and groaning about layoffs in federal government. Well, you've got to break eggs to make an omelet. If you're going to cut costs, you got to get rid of incompetence and people that aren't pulling their weight or aren't necessary. So they seem to be and I don't think the taxpayers are very sympathetic, and the voters. Get it efficient, save us some money, cut some costs. We're getting into debt. And yet the legacy media is championing the government workers. It's very strange.
On the world stage, where does this leave U.S. allies, particularly Ukraine?
Well, that's a real problem for everybody. I would say that what he does at home is their business, and that doesn't affect anybody else. But he is taking an axe to trading relationships, to security arrangements, to all kinds of things. And that affects, of course, their partners. And all the partners are very discombobulated to be true. I mean, he's deploying tariffs as a weapon, as an economic weapon to get more benefits for the United States over trading partners. And of course, what he's doing with Ukraine, I think, is probably the most frightening example of this new, not Pax Americana, Trump Americana. And that is, he changes his mind. He knifes you in the back. I mean, you take, and doesn't get the facts right. So, for instance, if you've heard some of his rhetoric, he thinks Russia's the victim, not Ukraine. If you've heard some of his policy initiatives, he wants to take all the mineral wealth from Ukraine in reparations for helping it. It's the victim. Russia should be giving the reparations to Ukraine or to the United States. So he's got it. He's got it all wrong, and that's very worrisome because you can't make a deal with this guy and have it stick.
And British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called this a once-in-a-generation moment. Have Europe's emergency meetings been fruitful in the security field?
Well, I think that Europe is a problem. It really is. Europe's tragic because it's a great place. Don't get me wrong, but it's a bunch of countries that have been massacring each other for centuries, and they finally decided to get together economically. So it's an economic model. It's really not a political model because everybody does their own thing and they don't get along and they don't move forward with one mind. I think it's obvious to them they have to become a political entity with an armed force so they can defend themselves because, Russia's on the rampage. That's going to take a long time. And, yourself, if you have 30 people on a committee, it's a nightmare to get anything decided and done.
Well, one more member that's joined that committee, at least for meetings, is Canada. Attended a second emergency meeting in Europe earlier this week. Some might not realize that Canada has been aiding Ukraine militarily since 2014. So how crucial could Canadian support be?
To helping Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine or Europe more widely?
Yeah, Canada is not hasn't been a good boy when it comes to military capacity. Trudeau was, I don't know what he was, incompetent. And for 10 years of Trudeau government, the military has been axed and neglected. And we have never met our NATO commitments, along with a lot of other European NATO members. So, Canada has done a bit. I don't think we've been overly generous toward Ukraine, and we certainly couldn't carry the ball. Europe is going to have to, and Europe is the one that has to because it's next.
And they might have to do that quite quickly. I mean, you write that Trump could turn the US geostrategy sort of plan on its head, attempting to turn Russia on China in a way. I mean, can Trump really win over Putin in that capacity?
He seems to be doing all kinds of interesting things in the think tanks, in the conservative think tanks, and in the White House with the current incumbent. The big threat is China. It's not Russia. Even though Russia is causing more trouble than China ever has. I mean, Russia is causing trouble in Africa and the Middle East. October 7th, the attack on Israel was on Putin's birthday. Hamas did it. I mean, he's everywhere. He's causing trouble. And, but they still and all think. And that leads a lot of people to speculate, is he in their pockets? There's stories coming out now about that he was, recruited as a KGB agent. I don't know if any of that's true. I doubt it. But, he's a coziness with a lot of the oligarchs. In fact, one of the oligarchs is sitting in on the negotiations, a Russian oligarch who shouldn't be there, but he's a good friend of Donald Trump. So it's very odd. And I think what's happened is trustworthiness is gone. The guy changes his mind. He flip-flops. He gets the numbers wrong. I mean, he claims that America's given Ukraine $390 billion. That's just wrong. It's $100 billion, and 70 of it was spent buying arms in the United States, making jobs for Americans. And, to portray it as a bad guy when it's a victim, it's just absolutely totally off base. So he's getting pushback now. The Republican media is starting to say, wait a minute, who's the dictator? Are you kidding? And all of these things. So, hopefully there'll be some mitigation of the damage he causes, but it's going to be I think, a very frightening 4 years.
And where does that leave China? How are they going to be viewing what's going on in Europe, and especially what's going on with Russia?
Well, I think China would be wise to sit down with the United States in a room and sign a deal saying it will not invade Taiwan. I think it has to do that. Now, I don't think they ever really planned or intended to do that as yet. And of course, they couldn't as long as Biden was in because he gave it a ironclad guarantee of security. But Trump has never commented on Taiwan, so that could be something that or alternatively, God forbid, he hands China Taiwan on a platter. Don't know.
And where does that leave Western leaders' understanding of the threat from Russia?
Well, I think that Russia is still the biggest scourge in the world. I consider China a competitor that sometimes cheats and wants influence worldwide, but I don't see it in the same light. I think Putin is an evil nationalist, fascist. I think he's very frightening, and he has complete control over that country and its resources. So everybody has to tiptoe and be very careful. The only way you can get around the guy is hope he leaves or is removed soon and gang up on him. But Trump has divided the Western alliance, and so there's no ganging up on him, and that's got to be pretty scary. So I think too, Zelensky said it, and it's interesting what we might find. And Britain has always been a stalwart. What we might find is Ukraine's army, if after this is all over, should be deployed to protect all of Europe from Russia, because Ukraine's army is now bigger than the British, the French army, and the Polish armies combined. So deputize Ukraine to be the police for Europe, and then you've got an armed force that can protect you and then help rebuild the country.
And Keir Starmer has tried to remain close to the US. He said the UK wants to be a bridge with Trump. Is Trump interested?
I think Trump is a tricky character. I don't know. A lot of it's personality. He's a person who holds grudges like for a lifetime. I can't help thinking that, I don't know if your listeners will remember, the first impeachment of Trump was over the perfect phone call he made to Zelensky, who he allegedly asked to rig an investigation so that Joe Biden's son could get arrested in Ukraine. And he of course, didn't do that. And I think he's just getting even. I think it's a terrible way to behave, but he's acting like a potentate with a grudge.
So is that Keir Starmer's approach perhaps the right one given the situation right now, rather than Zelensky, who has really been fighting back against Trump this week? I mean, is that just going to kind of anger the bull, as it were?
Yeah, I think Britain can play an important role. It is a strong voice, and it does bridge the Atlantic more than, I mean, it still doesn't have a special relationship anymore, and it's not in the EU. But maybe that makes it a little more appropriate as an independent broker between the European Union and the United States.
And do you think Zelensky was right to take that slightly harder line against Trump?
Well, I think he was just shocked that a deal that he had proposed to Trump was just revised so appallingly, and without any respect whatsoever for uh, Ukraine's needs, and basically demanding war reparations from Ukraine, not from Russia. And so the whole thing is topsy turvy, and that's what I think is upsetting, and it's discombobulating all the leaders in the world, including probably China. They're probably wondering what to do. They're making noises now. Yesterday about, it looks like there's going to be a settlement. That's a good thing.
And it's not just Europe that has been upset by this. US stocks, especially in defense, have taken a somewhat rare dip below European markets. Are there signs that Trump realizes how closely the US economy is tied to, its military exports and prowess elsewhere in the world?
Well, it wasn't a collapse or anything like that, or a panic, or that sort of thing. I mean, they were riding high. The American economy is in great shape. I mean, it still has inflation, but it's the strongest economy in world history, and it's just roaring along. And I don't think that was a caution for anybody about what's happening. And of course, the defense stocks in Europe went up, because guess what? They're going to have to build a military industrial complex in a big fat hurry.
And will that act as do they have time to create that deterrent against Russia?
Well, if you can get 30 people around a committee table or a cabinet room to agree on anything, that would be a miracle in less than, years. But I think they are panicking. I got to be certain the EU has got to be panicking, and the people that are in the portfolios in the European Union are from countries that are frontline, from the Baltics and Poland, and they're terrified.
And we spoken today about the end of the American system, perhaps. Do you see a way back to that security system that we've lived in for the last at least nearly half a century, not just for America, but for the world at this point?
No, I don't, and I'll tell you why. I really believe that the Marshall Plan was quite remarkable. It built Europe, but Europe has been using the United States, as Canada, as a lot of countries, to protect it militarily without paying their fair share. And so they've been able to coast along quite nicely and really do very little by comparison and just be happy that the Americans were willing to take it on. Well, that's all over now. So there is going to have to be a European reckoning and that's why I'm sad that Britain is not in the EU, because well, maybe they will be in the EU any longer, because they are the moral, they're a moral authority. They historically they get it. Their base of knowledge in terms of geopolitics is second to none. I mean, the Americans don't have the think tanks and the expertise that the Brits do. So maybe they'll all get their act together. I think Macron is a good guy. He may, and I hope Germany gets frightened enough. But we'll see with this election. That may be another messy coalition, which means nothing will get. Maybe 60 people around a table trying to make a decision in Germany. It's amazing that it's lasted this well, and it's delivered a lot of economic benefit to the European people. But I think it's over. I think they have to spend a lot of money helping create and propagate their Ukrainian army, their Ukrainian mercenary army, to protect them.
And to finish, Diane, do you think Putin will be looking at this as a long-term good thing for the Kremlin and for Russia?
I think he's got to be delighted. He's not being demanded to put any major concessions on the table. He seems to be dictating. We know he has economic problems, and his military is mediocre, and is losing thousands of people wounded a day still. He has no public to answer to. So and he's not feeling any pain as a result of it. I think he's just happy to see what he can get out of Trump. And he may get Trump a lot more than we think. I mean, he's actually talking about reparation being paid, any reparations being paid to Ukraine, that 20% of that would go to help him rebuild the lands he's stolen from Ukraine.
Well, Diane Francis, thank you very much for joining us today on the Trump Report.
You're welcome, anytime.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news and analysis, or read it on thetimes.com. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.